We spent billions of dollars for many, many years, basically hurting people, turning ordinary drug users, and sometimes people who go from being people who use illicit drugs occasionally to people who use them regularly and develop a problem. We then turn them into criminals. That's the current approach, and everything that stems from that is a consequence of treating this as a law and order issue rather than treating it as a health issue.
I've worked around Prohibition for many years, for over 20 years, and it's been the prohibition of X-rated films, the prohibition of sex work, the prohibition of content online, and it doesn't matter what the product is, prohibition does not work.
We recognise that drug prohibition is completely arbitrary and unrelated to risk and or harm of the banned substance, and that a shift away from prohibition is taking place around the world. Socialist Alliance believes that Australia's current drug laws have compounded and increased the adverse health, social and economic effects of drug use in Australia.
A simple question. If alcohol and tobacco are recognised by medical people around the world as being more harmful than cannabis, why is it that cannabis users are criminals and alcohol and tobacco users aren't? And to me, the answer is pretty clear. The policy is based in prejudice.
So what is the truth about drug prohibition and the war on drugs at the local level? The truth or evidence of the failure of drug prohibition is quite evident in its application on the streets. Let me give you some examples. If I'm from an abusive, disadvantaged and broken family, if I have to score heroin on the streets and inject in a dirty laneway in North Richmond with my kids watching and then get rid of the needles quickly in someone's backyard, so I won't be caught by the police, who are everywhere, and then head off to my job as a street sex worker, then yes, the community hates me. If I try to give up the gear, my criminal history of drug use will constantly haunt me and be a reminder to my family, prospective employers and my landlords that once a junkie, always a junkie. Will this drive me back to the life I've only ever known, but despise so much? Probably. We all choose to use drugs. We live in a society that takes drugs. They provide many benefits. But no one I know ever chose to become the most despised and reviled members of society, as heroin users in particular have become.
Member of a previous government, a person who aspires to be part of the next government, I wholeheartedly understand and accept the logic that you need to shift resources and allocation and effort away from law enforcement, and you actually deal it into, as much as possible into the preventative, supportive end, in terms of the treatment, the appropriate resource allocation so that people get access to the appropriate forms of treatment, to back them in at all stages through their treatment and their pathway of their treatment. Wholeheartedly support that that's where resources should be dedicated towards.
And look, a simple example, figures were put around there, about $4 billion odd marijuana market. You've got $7 billion consumer market in drugs in Australia. Let's just tax that at, let's say, roughly 50%. $3.5 billion would go a long way for schools, for education, for rehabilitation. Balance the budget if that's someone's problem at the moment.
Jennings ex-Paddy's position, we have always had a position of decriminalisation of drug use alongside with needle exchange programs. I was involved in some of the first needle exchange programs during the late 90s and the implementation of that. In those days we had some brave politicians. We had some brave health ministers saying, you know what? If we don't do something and we do something drastic, if we don't do something drastic, we will lose a lot of people to HIV and AIDS. So my policy, and I suspect many of my friends on this panel, it will be their policy to decriminalise all drugs. Not just marijuana, not just ecstasy, not just alcohol. Let's decriminalise the lot. And that way, as Richard said, we can treat it as a health issue rather than a criminal one.
again, I think we learn a lot from climate change about this. The climate change debate has had a lot of people who are getting increasingly frustrated. Academics like me, so I completely sympathize with them. They're going out of their minds with frustration. They have the data. They have even more data. They collect even more data. They form into academies. They form into committees. They form into even larger committees. They're, in the UN, they're international governmental committees. They have so many names. We can tell how important they are, and still nobody is listening. So this is not a fact problem. It's a political problem. It's a communication problem.
Last year, when the debate happened at the City of Yarra, I couldn't believe the difference that 15 years had made, that people were actually able to think about this in a much more civilised and reasonable manner.
It's not that long ago that we operated under the White Australia policy, and it was our government said, hey, don't like the colour of your skin, off you go. Now, a couple of years later, we're proudly multicultural. We have the ability, we know how to overcome prejudice.
I think change is happening. I think it is slow and people do get frustrated, but I do think there'll be the combination of people such as the people in the room today and those external forces that there will be some significant changes in the near future.